Hello, this is Daniel Lee, and on this edition of Melee Science, we're going to talk about Jigglypuff and today's meta, and why Hungrybox seems to be the only one seeing success with the character. Now, of course, this is a question I get asked very often. Usually with most of the top tiers, we see a large amount of representation with the character. Fox has a bunch of players representing the character at a high level. However, when it comes to Jigglypuff, we really only see Hungrybox performing really well. However, when we look below Hungrybox, there isn't that much top tier talent. We have Prince Abu, who's in the top 50. We had Tech for a little bit before he disappeared. We also have a bunch of top 100 borderline players that if they entered more events, then we would probably see them on the annual SSBM rank. But all in all, the representation of Jigglypuff is really low, despite the fact that we have a top tier Jigglypuff winning events. Now, why is this the case? And I think there's a bunch of reasons why. Down to the skill set required to be really good with Jigglypuff, to the social dynamics, and the fun people have in playing the character. Now, at the lowest level of play, I really do think that Melee draws a certain type of player and a certain type of audience. I imagine that when somebody watches Melee as an esport, they're drawn to the high speed action of characters like Fox or Falco, or Sheik, Marth, Captain Falcon. All these characters are very fast, they're very dynamic, they rely on awesome movement that feels nice to not only play, but also to watch. Now, unfortunately, I do not think the natural gameplay and meta of Jigglypuff attracts a lot of new players. It's not to bash Smash 4 in any way, but I do believe that the gameplay exhibited by Jigglypuff attracts more Smash 4 players than Melee players or Melee enthusiasts. Now, with that being said, I do have to say that Jigglypuff has a low tech skill barrier, so maybe that's attractive to a new player that doesn't want to exhaust their hands or spend hundreds of hours in tech skill mechanics to learn the game. However, if you're practicing by yourself, there is net play today, but it is actually really fun and rewarding to learn the mechanics of the game. So if you're a Fox player, a Falco player, or a Captain Falcon main, it's really fun to grind out the tech skill, learn how to L cancel, learn how to shuffle your first aerial, learn how to wave dash, or nail your first long combo as Marth or Falcon. It's really rewarding to do as your first time, and it's really fun to grind out as you get to see noticeable improvement over time. Now with Jigglypuff, what are you exactly going to practice on your own? Most of her characteristics rely on movement, zoning patterns, and conditioning. So a lot of your gameplay development really comes down to playing against other people. Now that's an issue because Jigglypuff unfortunately has this negative stigma attached to her, that she's a no-skill, anti-fun character. Because if you look at the perspective of another character, they're grinding out the tech skill, they're practicing, and then all of a sudden they see this Jigglypuff player grabbing a misspaced aerial or finding a gimp or spamming back airs. It's really frustrating for other players, and oftentimes they're going to complain and say that Jigglypuff is brain dead, that there's no skill to playing her, and a Jigglypuff player is going to receive a lot of negative backlash if they see any degree of success, which is unfortunate because it's a very scrubby mindset, but I understand that it's a very prevalent mindset that's pervasive throughout the Melee community. Now, let's say you're a Jigglypuff player, you see some degree of success, and all of a sudden you fight the next tier of players that can deal with the back air spam, they can deal with the rest, they know how to not get grabbed. You're gonna have to deal with campers, and it's not easy to deal with. Although we watch Hungrybox deal with it pretty well, I think our sample size and our perception of how Jigglypuff deals with it is very biased. And when you watch and actually play Jigglypuff, try to play against a Fox player, for example, that knows how to camp and will not interact with you as a player. And to grow from that space requires that you learn how to approach very well. Now, unfortunately, that's very hard to mimic. When you play Fox or Falco or tech skill heavy character, you can understand how they implement combos, you understand the basic options and why they're good or why a certain option may not be as good. With Jigglypuff, it's a little bit more nebulous. There's a bunch of tutorials on how to implement tech skill into your game with the faster characters, but there aren't so many tutorials that explain how do you cut off a faster character in the neutral game, how do you deal with neutral interactions, how do you condition your opponent, how do you zone your opponent, how do you take advantage of stage control. All those factors aren't really explained very well. And in commentary and analysis, it's really hard to explain that in a tight, succinct manner, whereas If you're explaining what Fox is doing, if they, let's say they do wave shine into up smash, that's really easy to explain and easy to mimic. When you look at Hungrybox and try to mimic what he's doing, the big issue is that he builds a lot of context to his gameplay. So he's not just stringing together a bunch of random moves, he's throwing out moves and getting a feel for his opponent and what they're willing to do and how they're gonna move around the stage. Now the issue with that is that if you try to implement and copy Hungrybox without understanding the context of what he's doing, you're going to fail miserably. Because with Hungrybox, he's eliminating a bunch of options, he's spacing very well so that his opponent has to make a very tough decision, and he's building a story around it. So he may notice out of an array of options, let's say his opponent has A, B, or C, he will pick up on patterns and realize this guy's doing option A a lot, or this guy is doing option B a lot, and he will punish it later down the match. Now try explaining all those concepts I just said right now to a new player. It's overwhelming, and although some people may understand it from a theoretical level, it's not that easy to implement in your gameplay. And furthermore, Jigglypuff is a high pressure character, but not in the way that you may think. Although Hungrybox, implements a lot of pressure with his rests and his gimp setups, it's really demoralizing if you are a Jigglypuff player and you get an opening and you miss your punish. Now, some people may say that that's really easy and borderline trivial to nail these punishes, but it's not as easy as you may think. And I think many people in the community talk in very big generalities. For example, if you were to combo Fox with Martha on Final Destination, you might just say, just do the up throw chain grab, but may not understand the nuances of it. For example, you need to understand the DI, and you also have to understand percentages. So sometimes the regrab may not be the best option. Sometimes you may have to up tilt. Sometimes you may have to space a different move or a dash attack or do a fair. And there's a lot of decision trees in that process that make it more than trivial. And it's why Mutaking is pretty much the only Marth able to combo on FD, whereas we see the second tier Marths such as the Moon and Pew Pew, they're not as good or as competent as comboing a Fox on Final Destination. Now we bring this back to Hungrybox, and I have to say that Hungrybox stands out, and why he's seeing so much success whereas other people aren't is that he understands the percentages, he understands the DIs, he understands what to do in a large amount more situations than the other Jigglypuffs. So that's why his grabs are so lethal. He can understand what he needs to do, and even if his opponents know how to DI out of the rest directly, he can extend the combo and kill his opponent or find a way to get them off stage, which is something that the other Jigglypuffs aren't doing. Now, if you have more questions about the character meta in Melee in 2017, go ahead and drop a comment in our YouTube or on my Twitter or even on Ask FM. Thank you for listening.